Today on how to make a device to stop your dog from eating disposable razor blades. If your dog is a stupid idiot like mine, they may enjoy consuming your disposable razor blades out of the trash as a midday snack. Eating razor blades is bad for your health and generally frowned upon in most countries. So I made this device to keep the razors out of his reach. This is basically just a couple of simple components that are almost exclusively 3D printed. Let's take a look at this list. A torsion spring, main drive gear that's attached to the same axis as the torsion spring, an idler gear, called such because it's a deadbeat that does no work, the final output gear and shaft, some string, I'm using fishing line, and whatever is going to be on the end of your entire contraption. This is a 3D printed torsion gear that, as it's rotated, it begins to store torsion, or be in torsion, have torsion, something like that, in the spring. Hence the name torsion spring. This is driven by a series of gears that reduce the final output to a 9:1 gear ratio. As you pull the razor blade or whatever you may have attached at the end, the torsion gear begins to compress, which is then released as the razor blade is pulled back in. Now, the torsion spring can only rotate and compress in one direction. It extends in the other. Because of this, we need to check which direction we're rotating our final output shaft. Luckily, this is easy enough to change. You just loop the string over the top or bottom so it rotates the output shaft in the appropriate direction. I designed the bodies to have this C-shape cut out so you can see the torsion spring compressing and the main gear turning. And that's it. Super simple. Now, in full transparency, I copied the gear train from the spring car model in order to save time when putting this together. But these components are not really that hard to design in CAD, so let me show you how that's done real quick. First, for the torsion spring. We're going to create a spiral body and sketch out the center shaft fitment and extrude that. Next, we're going to finish the spiral with some arcs and the circles that will be extruded to the mount. Now let's extrude the whole thing, and we're pretty close to the original, I think. Now for the gears. We're going to use the gear plug-in to mimic the original size. Next, we're going to cut out the slots and extrude those and thin out the final gear. Don't forget to add your locking ring, and voila! That's pretty close to the original. And here's some tips that I learned by going through this process. Number 1, build your gear train first, then build the body around it. You want to build your gear train or mechanisms first. Understand where they're going to sit and how they're going to interact, then build the body or the enclosure around the mechanism. This way you can optimize for the size of the final part and space on the inside of the body. For example, here, I technically built the body around the gear train, but I didn't optimize the space. I have this huge gap on the inside that's being used for nothing and just makes the whole thing overly chonky. Number 2, check your tolerances. The spring tension in the gear can cause the gear train to pop out of place if your through holes don't have tight enough tolerances. I was also experiencing some binding because there was too much play in between the gears. So check the tolerances on your through holes and the backlash on your gears as well. Number 3, parting lines are a blessing. If you have a clamshell or simply two parts that need to be stuck together, don't forget your parting line. This is essentially recessed grooves that allow both halves to mate together nicely. This keeps the two halves from moving or shifting around and helps to keep your little spinning insides exactly where they should be. We all know that hindsight's 20/20, but if I were to go back, what would I change about this design? Either add another gear reduction or cut this space out that's not serving any purpose. Personally, I think I would add the gear reduction because we could use a little bit more extension on the pullout. And I'd add a better lip over the gap where the string comes out. I made the gap bigger so you could see the output gear turning, but I realized this was a mistake because now the wire has a tendency to wrap around the gear when it's retracting. I'd also make the whole thing a little bit thinner. It's got some room to slim down. But anyway, I hope you learned something and thanks for watching. The files are available to download if you would like to print this out and make it yourself.